Imagine this. You're standing in a forest where no path exists, no markers, no sounds. Just the dense hush of untouched earth and the heartbeat in your chest. You've left your phone behind. There's no signal, no one to reach out to, no notifications, no ambient chatter from the world you've grown used to. Just you and the silence. At first, it feels like freedom, a relief from the clamor, the noise, the constant demand to perform, to react, to be someone. But then something shifts. Time stretches. The silence, once comforting, grows heavy. There's no soundtrack to distract you, no one to mirror yourself back to you. You're no longer someone's friend, employee, partner, follower, or enemy. You are just you. But who is that? That question doesn't feel philosophical. It feels like a confrontation, like a stranger staring at you from across a dimly lit room. And what's worse, that stranger bears your face. In the absence of noise, you start to speak, not aloud, but internally. The thoughts that rise are not the ones you would ever post online. They're not curated. They're not proud. They're not even entirely coherent. They're fractured, ancient, some whispering with the voice of your childhood self, others shouting like echoes of your worst fears. And then, without warning, a memory floats up. One you haven't thought of in years. A lie you told. A wound you ignored. A truth you buried so deep you forgot you were hiding it. The silence has no mercy. It dredges up everything. Not just what you wanted to find, but what you needed to avoid. So you start talking to yourself. You say things out loud just to hear a sound, to remind yourself that you still exist in space, not just in thought. But even your own voice sounds foreign, too sharp, too loud, like it doesn't belong here. What is this place? What is this silence? We think of silence as emptiness, as lack, as void. But what if it isn't? What if silence isn't the absence of something, but the presence of everything we've managed to suppress? What if silence is where the real you has been waiting all along? You've been taught from your earliest days to avoid silence, to fill it, hum a tune, turn on the TV, check your phone, speak just to break the discomfort. And yet, in those rare moments when the world quiets, when you're alone in your room at night, or staring out of a train window, or lost in the stillness of nature, something stirs, a flicker, a presence that feels both terrifyingly intimate and eerily unknown. You scroll to distract from it. You joke to distance yourself from it. You move faster, talk louder, stay busier, anything to avoid that looming, unbearable intimacy with yourself. But why? Why does the stillness make us feel so exposed? Why does solitude feel like danger when it's actually the only state in which you can't lie to yourself? Think of this. How much of your identity is performative, crafted in the eyes of others? Would you still believe what you believe, dress how you dress, speak how you speak if no one was watching? If you had to sit in silence with no one to impress, no role to play, what part of you would remain? Silence doesn't flatter your ego. It doesn't applaud. It doesn't validate. It only reflects. And in that reflection, you begin to see the cracks, the inconsistencies in your story, the masks you've worn for so long, you forgot they were masks. The silence does not lie. It does not play along. It only holds the mirror. But here's the terrifying paradox. That which you fear in the silence might be the very thing that could save you. You spend years constructing a life, a personality, an identity built from the outside in. But in silence, all those scaffolds collapse. And beneath the rubble, something ancient stirs. Not the you who learned to people please, not the you who adapted to survive, but the raw, wordless essence that existed before language, before labels, before fear. And once you glimpse that, you cannot go back to sleep. So the question is not whether silence is scary. It is. The question is whether you are brave enough to meet the version of yourself that only silence can introduce you to. Are you? Because if you are, then prepare to descend. The real journey does not begin with discovery. It begins with the stripping away of everything false. And the silence, that's the first knife. Let's go deeper. The moment you retreat into silence, something strange happens. The external world fades, but a louder world awakens inside. The voice you hear is not entirely yours. It is an amalgam, a patchwork of commands, criticisms, aspirations, and fears, sewn together from every authority, culture, trauma, and belief you've ever absorbed. Here lies the hidden problem. You are not who you think you are. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And now you understand why. The self you present to the world, your persona, is not your essence. It is a defense, a social mask. Jung called it a compromise between individual and society. It allows you to function, but it also hides you from others and from yourself. You were trained from birth to become someone acceptable. The child who expresses their anger gets disciplined. The one who's too quiet is told to speak up. Every reaction, every emotion was weighed against what made others comfortable. Slowly, unconsciously, you learn to amputate the parts of yourself that threatened rejection. You learn to be likable before you learned to be real. What remains is a hollow performance. You've become an actor, expertly playing the role of you. Now ask yourself, when you're alone and the mask slips, what comes through? Jean-Paul Sartre believed that most people are in bad faith, lying to themselves about who they really are, choosing comfort over authenticity. Why? Because authenticity requires a confrontation with the void, the terrifying awareness that you are not given a self. You must become one. And in that freedom, there is dread. But how can you become something if you don't even know what you are? This is the silence's gift and its curse. It exposes your fragmentation. The multiple voices inside you don't agree. One pushes you toward ambition, another toward safety. One shames you, another begs for compassion. One part wants to scream, another says, "No, that would make you unlovable." You are not a self, you are a battleground. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that human beings are driven by a blind, irrational force he called the will, a perpetual striving that never rests. Even when you achieve what you thought you wanted, another desire takes its place. The silence unveils this hunger. You feel it in your restlessness, in the itch to pick up your phone, in the gnawing discomfort of doing nothing. You mistake this agitation for boredom, but it is actually your nervous system withdrawing from the drug of distraction. You've spent your life reacting to messages, to expectations, to noise. Silence strips that away, leaving only the raw engine of craving underneath. And here's where the real problem begins. You've been trained to live outward, to chase significance through visibility. Success is measured by how many people see you, like you, want to be you. In silence, you are unseen. There are no mirrors, no applause, no algorithm feeding you relevance. You vanish from the collective gaze. And in that vanishing, panic. Why? because society has tied your being to your function. Your value is conditional on performance, productivity, personality. Remove the function, and you feel valueless. But that's a lie. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, wrote that man is not destroyed by suffering. He is destroyed by suffering without meaning. The silence doesn't create suffering. It reveals its absence of meaning. It forces you to ask, what is the purpose of my life beyond what others see, beyond what I do? This is not a comfortable question. It is a violent one. Because it may demand the death of the self you've spent your whole life constructing. The psychologist Rollo May described this moment as the encounter with nothingness. When all the scaffolds of your identity fall, you face a terrifying truth. You do not know who you are. But don't mistake this as failure. It is the beginning of awakening, because hidden beneath this disintegration is something more ancient than your name, your history, your habits. A spark you've carried since before you could speak. It has no language, no role, no face. But it's alive. You've felt it before, in moments of deep awe, stillness, or grief. That eerie clarity when all distractions fall away and time slows. That is the real you. And it terrifies the false self, because if you touch that essence, the carefully built world around your mask begins to crumble. The choices you've made, your job, your relationships, your goals, may no longer align. Your entire life may begin to look like someone else's dream. This is why most people run. They don't fear silence because it is empty. They fear it because it is full of truths they're not ready to hear, full of grief for the parts of themselves they abandoned, full of longing they never dared admit. This is why most people run. They don't fear silence because it is empty. They fear it because it is full of truths they're not ready to hear, full of grief for the parts of themselves they abandoned, full of longing they never dared admit. And yet, every philosophical tradition worth its salt, whether it's Stoicism, Buddhism, or existentialism, says the same thing in different languages. You must go inward to come alive, but the path inward is not lit. There are no maps. The territory is wild. You will encounter your shadows, the parts of you you've disowned. Jung called this the shadow, your envy, rage, shame, lust, cowardice. Everything you swore you didn't feel, but they are yours. And until you own them, they will own you. This is why the silence feels hostile. It doesn't obey your ego. It doesn't care about your curated image. It presents you to yourself uncensored. And so the real question is no longer, why is silence uncomfortable? So the question is, what have you built your life to avoid? The silence answers brutally, honestly, without negotiation. And if you're brave enough to listen, you'll hear the whisper beneath all the noise. You've never truly met yourself, but I have. And I've been waiting. Now the cost of avoidance becomes unbearable, because the longer you run from silence, the more your life becomes a stage play, performed for a faceless audience. You begin to forget which lines are yours and which are just part of the script, until one day you wake up and realize you never really lived, only performed. But it's not too late, because now you see the hidden problem. You feel it like a splinter in your mind, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So what happens when you keep running? That's where we go next, into the unseen consequences that shape everything you are. You wake up and reach for your phone before your feet touch the floor. It's automatic, almost mechanical. A flick of the thumb, a cascade of images, opinions, updates, each one a distraction, a temporary anesthesia. You scroll, but you're not really looking. You're searching for something you can't name. Relevance, belonging, relief, maybe just an excuse not to be alone with your own thoughts. This is where the unseen consequences begin. Not with some grand tragedy or breakdown, but in the small, silent erosion of the self. A slow disintegration masked by routine. You don't even notice it happening. That's what makes it so devastating. When you flee the silence, you don't just escape discomfort. You exile your inner world. And over time, the cost is staggering. You become a stranger to your own soul. Let's be precise. This isn't some vague poetic notion. Neurologically, the brain becomes shaped by the stimuli it repeatedly engages with. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of self-awareness, atrophies under chronic distraction. The more time you spend outward, the less capacity you have to go inward. Your attention span collapses. Your emotional depth flattens. You mistake stimulation for satisfaction, quantity for quality. Eventually, you forget how to be with yourself. Your mind becomes a noise chamber, not a sanctuary. In his critique of modern society, Aldous Huxley warned that people would come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities for thought. And here we are. We call it convenience, connectivity, culture. But beneath those glossy labels lies a quiet epidemic, the inability to sit in stillness without unraveling, because in silence you feel it, that gnawing dissonance. Something isn't right. Something is missing. But you've been trained to fill the gaps externally, feeling disconnected. Call a friend, open an app, buy something, post something, keep moving. But motion is not the same as meaning. And when you mistake one for the other, life becomes performative. You don't live it, you act it, you optimize it, you brand it. This is the modern soul's fracture. We document our experiences more than we actually experience them. The inner world becomes subordinate to the outer image, but every performance has a cost. Over time, something inside you starts to feel hollow. You laugh, but it feels rehearsed. You achieve, but the joy is thin. You're surrounded by people, but you feel deeply alone. This isn't depression. It's something subtler, more existential. It's the ache of spiritual dehydration. You thirst for something real, but you can't name what it is, because naming it would require you to stop, to listen, to descend into that terrifying quiet where the real questions live. Who am I when no one is looking? What do I believe that no one taught me? What pain have I numbed for so long it feels like personality? In silence, these questions don't whisper, they roar. And that's why silence is feared, because it doesn't just challenge your habits. It threatens your identity, and identity for most people is not a truth, it's a defense. A fragile scaffolding built to shield the psyche from the chaos within. But here's what psychology won't always tell you. What you suppress doesn't die. It festers. Repress your sadness long enough, and it leaks out as cynicism. Swallow your rage, and it reemerges as apathy. Abandon your inner truth, and it haunts you, not as a ghost, but as a persistent sense of wrongness in your own life. The philosopher Martin Heidegger called this fallenness, the way humans fall into inauthentic modes of being, becoming absorbed by the they-self, the diluted self shaped by public norms, not personal essence. When you flee from silence, you fall. You become a copy of a copy. But the danger isn't just psychological, it's existential, because what you suppress, you stop evolving. The real you, the unedited you, cannot grow in noise. It cannot breathe in performance. It needs solitude. It needs friction. It needs time to unravel, to confront itself, to rebuild from something deeper than cultural default settings. The consequences of avoiding this are all around you. You see it in people who look alive but are emotionally dead, in relationships that are close in proximity but distant in soul, in lives filled with motion yet devoid of stillness. There is a reason burnout is now epidemic. It is not just from overwork, it's from undermeaning. We are exhausted not by how much we do, but by how little of it connects to who we truly are. This is the soul's revenge. You cannot fake alignment forever. The longer you ignore the silence, the more subtle damage accrues, not just to your psyche, but to your very sense of reality. You stop trusting yourself, because every decision you make is filtered through layers of distortion. What will they think? How will it look? Will it be enough? Eventually, you stop asking what you want altogether. This is not life. This is exile. But unlike physical exile, there's no bar, no obvious wall. You walk freely, smile often, even succeed by every external measure. And yet you carry that vague ache inside, like something is off, but you can't tell what. Until silence shows you, not with words, not with logic, but with absence. It takes away the noise, and what's left is you, your fears, your longings, your unanswered questions, your childhood wounds, your buried gifts. All of it rises. And for a moment, just a moment, you are raw and real and awake. But most people don't make it that far. They feel the pressure building and retreat. Back to noise, back to performance, back to numbness. Because it's safer to be miserable in the known than to risk being transformed by the unknown. But make no mistake. Every time you turn from silence, you delay the confrontation your soul is begging you to have. And time is not infinite. Eventually, your body will revolt through anxiety, illness, fatigue. Eventually, your relationships will fracture because no one can connect to a mask. Eventually, your spirit will go quiet, not because it gave up, but because it wasn't heard. The silence will still be there, waiting, patient, unflinching, because it knows something you've forgotten. The life you are truly meant to live can only begin after the one you've been performing ends. So the question remains, not for your mind, but for your being. How much longer can you afford to run from what's inside you? When you're ready to stop running, we begin the rebellion. You don't need another self-help book. You don't need a morning routine, a journal with prompts, or a retreat in the mountains. You've done those. They're polished cages, beautiful distractions, rituals that look like freedom but still avoid the real confrontation. No, what you need is something far more radical. You need to rebel, but not in the way you've been taught, not with noise, not with slogans or manifestos. This rebellion is quieter, stranger, and infinitely more terrifying, because it begins by doing the one thing you've avoided your entire life. You stop, not just physically, existentially. You step out of the performance. You drop the mask, not in front of others, but in front of yourself. You become still, and in that stillness, you allow every part of you to emerge. The rage, the guilt, the longing, the joy, the confusion. No edits, no censorship, no shame. This is not meditation. This is psychological exorcism. You will feel like you're dying, and in a way, you are. The you that depended on approval, on validation, on performance, that self begins to burn, and what remains is raw, wordless, undomesticated. The ancient mystics called it the dark night of the soul. But Nietzsche said it differently. You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? This is where most people turn back. They dip their toes in silence and flee at the first ripple. Because it hurts, it disorients, it deconstructs everything you've clung to. But if you stay, if you choose to endure the collapse, a door opens, not a physical one, but an interior shift. You begin to notice things you've never seen before, patterns in your thoughts, roots of your fears, echoes of voices that don't belong to you, and with each insight, the scaffolding of your false self weakens. This is where the rebellion gains momentum. You stop seeking answers from outside and begin interrogating your inner architecture. You ask, whose values have I inherited without question? Which of my goals are actually survival strategies in disguise? What part of me have I locked in the basement of my being, hoping no one would ever find it? And when the answers come, they are not gentle. They arrive like a demolition crew. But let them in, because this is not destruction for the sake of chaos. This is liberation. The collapsing tower was never your home. It was your cage. Now you can build something new, but not from ambition, from authenticity. And here's where the rebellion becomes visible. Not just to you, but to the world. You begin to speak differently, slower, with more precision, less performance. You stop saying yes when your soul screams no. You stop trying to be understood and start understanding yourself. You stop trying to win and begin trying to be whole. This shift is not always applauded. In fact, it may threaten everything and everyone around you. People who benefited from your performance may resist your realness. You may be called cold, distant, selfish, but this is simply the world adjusting to your unedited presence. Do not shrink, because this is how every revolution begins. One soul stepping out of illusion and into alignment. You are not the first to do this. Think of Siddhartha Gautama, the prince who walked away from comfort to sit beneath a tree in silence, seeking the root of human suffering. Or Henry David Thoreau, who retreated to the woods of Walden to strip life to its essence. Or Carl Jung, who withdrew to Bullingen Tower to build not just stone walls, but inner sanctums where his real self could speak. Each of them did something simple but revolutionary. They listened, and through listening, they remembered that the real self does not speak in the language of culture. It speaks in symbols, images, feelings, and silence. It does not announce itself with certainty. It whispers through intuition, through dreams, through discomfort that won't go away. And here's the paradox. The more you surrender to silence, the more whole you become. This is where the rebellion becomes resurrection. You stop outsourcing your identity. You reclaim your intuition. You stop asking others how to live and begin remembering how it feels to be alive. You eat slower. You breathe deeper. You cry more. Not out of sadness, but release. You begin to make choices not from fear or habit, but from truth. You walk away from things that no longer resonate, not with bitterness, but with peace. This is not self-improvement. This is self-return. And yes, there will still be fear, but now it's not the dictator, it's a signal. You feel your pain, but it doesn't define you. You see your darkness, but it doesn't dominate you. You are no longer fragmented. You are present, alive. You've become the kind of person who can sit in an empty room without distraction and feel whole, not because you've mastered silence, but because you've merged with it. You are no longer afraid of the quiet because you've discovered what lives inside it. You, the real you. And now that you've tasted that, everything changes. You look around and see a world still caught in the trance, still running, still performing. You could scream at them to stop, to wake up, but you don't, because you understand something now. No one can be forced into authenticity. It must be chosen, and you, by daring to stop, to listen, to endure, have chosen. This is your rebellion, not against society, against the false self. And every time you return to silence, you return to your center, your anchor, your truth. So when the noise calls you back, when the world tries to pull you into its theater, you smile and walk the other way, because the rebellion has already begun, and it ends only when you discover the final truth, that the one you were looking for in every success, every relationship, every moment of applause was already waiting for you in the silence, and that now is where we must go, to the final realization, the ultimate truth. You're sitting alone. There's no music, no scrolling, no messages waiting. Just breathe. Just the hum of your own existence. And finally, for the first time in years, maybe decades, there is no one to impress, no one to outshine, no one to manage, fix, or protect. Just you. And the silence. At first, there's discomfort, a phantom itch for distraction. Your thoughts try to escape, replaying past failures, planning future victories, rehearsing imaginary arguments. But they dissolve now, like smoke through fingers. You're tired of running. You let the silence in, and what rises is not what you expected, not enlightenment, not clarity, not even peace. What rises is a child, you. The unguarded, uncensored, unbroken version of you, still intact beneath all the identities you've worn. That child doesn't speak in words. They look at you, and in their eyes is a question. Where have you been? It's not an accusation, it's grief, because this real you has been waiting, not passively, but with a fierce, aching patience, for you to return. Not to the person the world asked you to be, but to the person you were before the world got its hands on you, before you were named, before you were praised or punished, before survival turned into performance. This is the final realization. You are not your thoughts. You are not your story. You are not even your personality. Those are garments, useful, yes, but temporary. Beneath them is something that cannot be advertised, branded, or taught. It cannot be improved, quantified, or socially ranked. It is simply you, whole, silent, timeless, a consciousness, a presence, a spark. It doesn't care what you've achieved. It doesn't need your resume, your trauma narrative, or your spiritual credentials. It has only one request. Be with me. And when you finally say yes, when you sit in that sacred space and stop trying to be anything at all, you return, not to an old self, but to a root self. You see now, the silence was never empty. It was full of truth. It held everything you were too distracted to feel, every intuition you ignored, every boundary you betrayed, every part of you you silenced to be accepted. And it held something else, too. Forgiveness. It never blamed you for leaving. It just waited. Because truth doesn't chase. It waits to be chosen. And here you are, choosing. That choice changes everything. Because now life stops being a chase for meaning and becomes an expression of meaning. You no longer seek purpose like a commodity to acquire. You realize you are the purpose. You are the still point in a spinning world, the awareness behind the mask, the witness behind the ego. You don't need to prove it. You don't even need to explain it. You just live from it, not as a brand, but as a being. And yes, the world will still try to pull you back. You'll still be tempted by old habits, old stories, old roles. But now you recognize the trick. You no longer confuse noise for importance. You no longer confuse validation for value. You no longer confuse attention for love. Because real love, self-love, soul love, is silent. It doesn't demand. It doesn't seduce. It simply is. And in that space of being, the world becomes different, not because it changed, because you did. You walk through crowds without needing to be seen. You create without needing applause. You connect without losing yourself. You give without sacrificing your truth. Because now you live from the inside out. You've inverted the hierarchy. What once seemed like the core, your image, your performance, your status, is now just surface, and what once was buried, your intuition, your soul, your silence, is now sovereign. This is the final paradox. The more real you become, the less the world recognizes you. But the more you recognize everything, you see through things, through posturing, through false urgency, through drama and performance and fear-based systems. You see how much of the world runs on unresolved inner voids. And yet, you don't hate it. You feel compassion because you've been there. You know what it's like to live outside your own skin. You know what it's like to mistake validation for worth. You know what it's like to be haunted by your own silence. And so you don't preach, you don't lecture, you just live, anchored in the real. Because nothing is louder than a life lived in radical presence. That presence becomes your rebellion, your truth, your offering, not as an escape from the world, but as a healing to bring into it. Now, when you sit in silence, it's not uncomfortable, it's home. Now, when you hear nothing, you smile, because you know. Silence is not absence, silence is return. It is where the masks fall, the noise fades, and you are finally allowed to be who you've always been beneath it all. So the next time you are lost, don't seek more. Don't run faster. Stop, sit, listen, and let the silence do what it's been aching to do all along. Show you the truth that cannot be spoken, the truth that you are not broken, not missing, not behind. You are here, and here is enough, because in the silence you don't find the real you. You remember that you were never anything else.